Welcome to Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff, where we interview newsmakers, storytellers, and all-around interesting people. Sit back, relax, unless you're driving, and enjoy the show. Here's Jackson.
Hello. I am Jackson Huff. This is Not in a Huff. Thanks for joining me. As always, really appreciate it. Have a really cool guest for you this week. I am interviewing Chris Carlson. Now, Chris, he was a member of the White House Press Corp for several decades. We're going to talk all about just what got him into, such a exclusive club. He was a cameraman, somebody behind the camera, but he's just had a firsthand account on a lot of major things that have happened, and then, met a lot of presidents. He worked in the White House under 6 different presidents. Shouldn't say under them. He worked for a news organization that was covering them. Definitely not under them. That's something we talk about, how, the media and, the different administrations were not at all, necessarily like working in unison. It's news has a job to do, which is to get the story, even if it's not a story that's a pleasant story for administrations, and the administration has a job to do, which is obviously lead the country, but also kind of put on that air. We're going to talk a lot about kind of smoke and mirrors and what that happens. He's going to tell us some fun stories from his, 6 different administrations, his favorite president, his least favorite president, some of his favorite stories. Just an awesome conversation. Think you're going to really, really enjoy this one, whether you're huge on, politics, whether you just like a story about someone doing some amazing things, or whether you're just kind of a little bit curious on exactly how the White House works. This was a really fun one. Without further ado, here is my interview with Chris Carlson. I'm here today with Chris Carlson. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing fine, thanks.
Yeah, so we're going to get into some really interesting, really cool things. But before we get into that career of yours, tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of away from the camera.
Away from the camera? Well, I'm retired now. I've been retired for several years.
Mm-hmm.
2 kids, grandchildren, a beautiful wife, and we retirement didn't turn out the way we hoped. We were free for about a year, and then the pandemic all of a sudden made everything a little bit more difficult.
But let's kind of get into your career, because that's kind of what we want to talk about. What started your passion for journalism, and there's this kind of a more distinct type of journalism you do, it, which is photojournalism. So talk about kind of that passion for journalism and how you got into photojournalism.
When I went to college in 1972, I majored in communications. My brother and I had a dark room at home. We had made little 8mm animated movies and things like that. So I sort of had like enough credentials to get into one of these communication schools. And this was back, it was like a cottage industry, essentially. It's not like today. I mean, everything then was done with film. All the visual arts was done with film. So I got a degree in communications, television, radio, and film. And, when I popped out of that, all of a sudden you're out on the street, it's like, okay, now what? I ended up working at a TV station. And, there were a variety of jobs there I could have gotten, but you only get the jobs that are open. It's like, when you land out there on the street, it's kind of like the street tells you where you're going. So I ended up as a new cameraman because that was what it was. One of these jobs was open at a station. And hey, are you interested in that? Yeah, I am. So I ended up getting it, and I had no idea what I was in for. I knew how to expose film without screwing it up all the time, and if you blew the exposure, you could wreck like $300 worth of film was like only 12 minutes of film back then. So it was, and you had to learn how to expose film properly. And then you had to learn how to shoot it very efficiently. You couldn't waste your shots, or like, oh, let's do that one over, that sort of thing. So you were really efficient at what you were doing once you learned it. And then everything morphed over to videotape. The cameras were really large, and around 1977 or so, it started going over to videotape. And so I ended up at another TV station, and they had all the what they called E&G, electronic news gathering gear. So everything went in that direction. And I worked at 3 different affiliates, and then ended up getting a job in Washington at ABC News. So, I mean, they were working people. I worked like 12 hours a day for 25 years, essentially. I did get tired of that. I can tell you that much. But it was fun, and I got to travel the world. I got to travel the entire country. I've been to every state. And you would go do these news shoots, which back then they were more informational. There's a lot more sort of show and tell type things that were done because the medium was a little newer than it is today. I mean, right now, all the show and tell stuff, the sort of really interesting stuff is actually on YouTube.
What part do you play as, the camera person in any of the actual, I guess, story? Are you ever involved in any of the interviews or any of the questions, anything like that? Or is it, your role just to make sure that it's presented well on film?
Yeah, that's a great thing to ask. When I was at local television, you pretty much did a lot of it. It would be all of the above. You would sometimes go out and get it on your own. They would just ask, "Hey, can you get some footage of this or that?" Because they needed, sort of a chunk to fill a part in a story. Some stories they knew what the story was, and they didn't really have to have a reporter there, so you would work alone. There's a lot of that in local television. When you get up to the networks, generally speaking, and by the way, in local TV, when you are working with a reporter, there's a lot of collaboration on, hey, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? We could, if I shoot this, we could put it in this way. By the way, you're probably editing the story too in local television. And that was the case when I was there. It was a lot of fun because I had my hands on from beginning to end of the whole process. When you get to the network level, no, it does not work that way. You're sort of like, one person in an assembly line, and you have to respect that and understand that it can be frustrating because you'd really like to get to control the end product, but you don't. And also at the network, you're not there like parsing through the ideas with a reporter like, hey, if we do this, you could write a section that says such and such and that sort of thing. No, that level of collaboration is not taking place because there's so many sort of defined roles for people. The other thing is all of their scripts are vetted by lawyers before they go on the air. Okay. I can't have a part in somebody's script. At the network level, they pretty much have people grouped as either editorial or not editorial.
Yeah, no, that makes sense for sure. And I want to kind of, because obviously the huge thing is that you were, part of the White House Press Corp and then also the briefing room. How did you get from, the local station? We already talked about you moving to the network, but then how did you get from that to, working on the White House? Was it as easy as that's just where they placed you? Or was that something that took a while to get to? Because I feel like a lot of times, with the White House correspondent, that's a step up when it comes to the front of the camera person anyways.
Right. Okay. Well, definitely on the reporting side, that's sort of a real end game gig for a reporter. I mean, no, they don't get those gigs. That's like a real plum. Although the funny thing is most of them have no clue how hard the job is going to be. And they're going to be working like ridiculous hours. And if the story goes in Saturday or Sunday, you're working then too. On the camera side of it, yeah, they actually were sort of particular about what camera crews they had. Like when I walked in the door, I was like a junior a camera guy. You're still like, well, let's see how the kid does. I mean, if you screw it up, they're probably not going to put you in the White House. I mean, it's just the natural thing in any work environment. Like once they get a level of confidence in you, then they push you into more scenarios. And I think everybody experiences that in whatever kind of job they happen to have. The people who are doing it already don't want to give it up. I mean, they don't want to share it so much. The traveling part of it is actually fun. I mean, eventually I did get very tired of that and did not want to do it anymore. But it was fun to, fly like it may have been thousands of times to go to other countries. But these were all like whirlwind tours. I mean, like you're seeing them like looking out the window kind of thing. And then you get on the ground, they put you on a bus and they take you to wherever, or or sometimes you're on a helicopter. If you're in the travel pool, which there's a group of like about 14 people who always are going with the president, they'll put you on on your own helicopter, and you'll fly and do that stuff. I wasn't always crazy about those helicopter rides. They were energizing and fun, but I was always worried about gravity. There's a lot of fun doing it. I never imagined I was going to end up in that. Everything that I got in this line of work was literally like hitting a crossroads, and I went to left or right, and it led to another thing. And frankly, so much was just luck, and like whatever opportunity was just there.
Yeah. And I guess I want to kind of talk about two things here. One, I guess that when your first time going to the White House, doing this stuff, what was that like? And then also just, based on what you were just saying, I know that there's, for most networks, there's a couple people that do the role. There may be a chief White House correspondent, but, there's other people too. How many camera people for each network's normally involved?
Where I worked, we had like generally about 6 camera crews that rotated the White House, but you'd have 2 in there every day. So, the rotations came around pretty rapidly, and you would do like a month at a time. Any more than a month really started to get to be too much, because, you'd pretty much be working 12-hour days. If it was a president that did a lot of traveling, you might be working like 7 days a week for a couple of weeks, whatever. I mean, it can get really crazy. I think the rest of the question got away from me.
Yeah, it's because I put too much into one question. That's not your fault. That's mine. My other part of it was just about it had nothing to do with the other question. Just the first time that you went to the White House, your first experience, what it was like.
Yeah, I think I went in there and I had to film Reagan in the East Room doing something. And I got to tell you, I was in awe. I was like I was, like 27 or something like that. And Ronald Reagan, he was a professional actor, and he had done a TV show that was on like every Saturday during my childhood and early teen years. And I had seen it, many, many times. It was called Death Valley Days or something like that. And it was, so, I mean, I had this guy in my mind. He was like a movie star. And so I was in awe. And, I think the funny thing was I then also got sent out somewhere there in the very beginning to film him leaving Andrews Air Force Base. And so, you get out there, they put you in this place. It's sort of out on the tarmac, a little fenced in area. And then he helicopters in from the White House, which is, like maybe 10 or 12 miles away. And so a helicopter comes in and it lands. And then he and his wife, Nancy, the first lady, get off the helicopter, and they walk over to the plane, and there's some Air Force guys at the bottom of the stairs, and he salutes. They all salute each other, and it all looks really cool and fun. And then he goes up the stairs. They get to the top of the stairs, and they turn around, and he's got his arm around her, and they're waving. And I had seen this shot many times, just as a TV viewer, and I thought, there's just a huge crowd. And so I knew there wasn't a crowd over there, but I looked over anyhow, and there was 12 people standing by the fence. And that's when all of a sudden I realized it's the illusion, and that, he was a professional actor. I mean, you wouldn't waste those moments. You don't get to the top of the stair to get on your own, most incredible plane in the country and not wave like there's, 10,000 people out there. So that's when I realized, number one, he was a great actor. Number two, there was always an illusion. And number three, they would always take advantage of it. And that's not just him. I mean, all of them, do that. But the first time I saw it, I was just stupefied,
Oh, I can only imagine for sure. And I want to kind of get to some of the questions I wouldn't have probably typically asked you. I don't like to make people pick favorites of much of anything, but you actually gave me some of these questions. So I want to ask you which president, and we haven't really mentioned it, but you covered 6 different presidents all the way from Reagan up to Trump. So a lot of presidents. And which one was the most fun to photograph?
All right. The most fun, this is no contest, was George Herbert Walker Bush.
Okay.
Bush, the 41st president, because he was a sportsman. They had a house in Maine on the coast. That point up there, it's at Kennebunkport, Maine, is it's one of the most sort of prolific points with a really nice house on it. And he had a cigarette boat, and he would drive out in that thing in the open ocean, and he'd just bomb along, leaping from wave top to wave top to go fishing to wherever the fish were. They'd find out on the radio where the fish were. And the first year up there, we all had chartered our own boats out of the little harbor there in Kennebunkport. And so he had this little flotilla of news media camera guys chasing him around. Of course, we couldn't keep up because the boat of his would go 50 miles an hour or something. It was a crazy ride. But we would, if he'd finally stop, we'd catch up, and then he'd have the rod out, he'd be fishing, and we'd try to get pictures of him fishing. And there was all this kinetic energy associated with it. So it was fun as a camera person. It was fun. There was a real challenge. You weren't just fighting, can I get close enough to make a picture? You were fighting the waves in the ocean. People were getting sick out there too. They got seasickness. There were people throwing up. There were people in boats all day long with no bathrooms. They had to figure out what to do. So he was absolutely the most fun to cover because he was a sportsman. And they even had a press party up there each summer, and they'd let people, they'd take him out in his boat. It was called Fidelity, and you could take a ride in it. I never was able to take a ride because there was always a line. And I was like, oh, the rest of them, there was some kinetic energy in some of them. Clinton used to jog a lot. George Bush, 43, jogged. There were some sort of, kinetic things that made using a camera a little more interesting, but he was the standout in terms of creative fun,
No, it sounds like it for sure. And we talk about, the most fun to photograph was all your work. It was with a video camera. You're not taking actual still photos, correct?
That's correct. I had a, shoulder mounted video camera, like a 25-pound monster with a 20-to-1 zoom lens. Now, in the travel pool, we would have a whole bunch of still photographers with us, and they're kind of going for a different thing because they're trying to make they're trying to get that moment, so they'll shoot hundreds of pictures, and they're just looking for that moment. Whereas TV, we're looking for the moment. Plus, if there's a reporter there, they'll probably ask a question, and they're going for the gotcha or the jugular vein or whatever, and they're trying to get information. Let's face it, no president is totally relaxed with the news media because he just doesn't know, he or she, but the person doesn't know what they might ask, and causing for difficult moments.
I can only imagine that. And that kind of into my next question: how much of it was really a versus mentality, or how much did you guys actually work together? The president's staff, the White House staff, how much of it was them kind of helping you guys say, this is what's going to happen now? Or is it really just you're along for the ride and get what you can get? How did that work?
Oh, no, that's a really good point. If you're in the White House itself and there's a photo opportunity, Oval Office, they literally will take, a whole bunch of cameras in. It's best if they do one wave first with stills and then a separate wave with video, because it's too many people if they're all in one wave. On trips, they would always publish a little booklet, 10 or 20 pages in it. And each sort of time increment, it would tell you, at this point, POTUS is president of the United States, will do this and do that, and do that. And they will say what kind of coverage is. If he's speaking, camera platform, 60 feet back. They usually detail those types of things. And also that there would be an audio mult, which is a feed of the podium. And a mult is a box that might have 20 outputs. So people could plug in their cords and catch the sound on that. They would detail all that type of information. So when you're on a trip, you go through that booklet pretty carefully. I would always, I'd go through it and circle the important things that applied to me. They did, they would guide you. It was sort of I don't want to call it you had a relationship. The relationship was, here's what you can do, go do it. Now, beyond that, that's it. If you were going to misbehave or not, they would usually have stanchions and ways to sort of corral you, so you wouldn't like flood the guy and that sort of thing. There's always a friction point. Okay, there's always one. It doesn't matter who the president is. I know people think that some presidents have cushy relationships with the press and so forth, and I don't think that's true. It's always adversarial. They may go through streaks where things are running really swell, but you never know. You're going to wake up the next day and there's some line of questioning that's going to come up, and it's not going to be so swell.
Yeah, and that seems to be the thing that I don't know. I feel like sometimes gets lost that. The role of journalism and the role of the news and everyone who covers it is to ask the tough questions. I don't think they're necessarily out to get one person over the other. It's just honestly probably out to not necessarily but to get the tough questions answered from anyone. It doesn't matter. I don't think they've got any animosity towards, the person that they're trying to cover.
Yeah, well, actually, what's really interesting is here's a funny analogy. The movie Star Wars. You've probably seen that. It's an ancient film by now, but there's a bar scene in it where there's like sort of every life form from the galaxy in the bar, and it's kind of a hilarious thing to see. Well, one of my coworkers always equated the White House briefing room to the bar scene in Star Wars. Like there was every possible life form in there as far as what sort of news was represented. Like I was in broadcasting, and so broadcasting's regulated. I mean, it's largely deregulated now, but they still are regulated. The FCC regulates broadcasting, and they're licensed. So you could potentially lose your television station license by doing the wrong things. So the broadcasters have always had to subscribe to some fairness rules, whereas there are other areas that are not regulated. For instance, cable is not regulated. There's no content regulations on that. I mean, if you're a newspaper, newspapers really aren't regulated. They were regulated in the past as to be able to own a television or a radio station in the same market. A lot of that has gone away, but they're not in there regulating their content, like whether there's any fairness in their content. Like, I think it's fair to say that broadcasters, if you look at their product, and I've been a party to a lot of it, they generally report the horse race. They don't try to tell you the winner is, except maybe on election day. But as far as like the scrimmages, they pretty much show the race or the battle. Now, everybody outside of broadcasting doesn't have to worry about losing the license. So internet media, they can editorialize all they want. I mean, there's no lid on it. There's no regulation there. So you have to understand that not every news organization is the same thing. Some things are news, and then some outfits are editorial. But the question is, as a reader or a viewer, do you know which one they are? Are they actually trying to just give you the horse race, or are they actually trying to tell you who's supposed to, cross the finish line? So I think that's one thing that's become very blurred, because there's so much more media now that the internet has given birth to.
Right. Yeah. And I want to get to that. I want to ask you kind of your advice for people who, consume news now, but I want to kind of stick right now with the presidential thing and ask you another question that you had given. And that is a few things that might surprise us about some recent presidents.
What might surprise about them? Oh, you want some stories?
Yeah, I do actually.
Oh gosh. Well, let me see. Well, again, like Reagan, he was a great communicator. And by the way, they were everybody in town was afraid of him. Capitol Hill, they were afraid of him because he was the great communicator. The Democrats had the House back then, and they went along with a lot of the things that President Reagan had proposed because his communication skills were incredible. And he would go into the Oval Office and he did a lot of Oval Office addresses. He was just amazing in there. By the way, since then, I see most of the other presidents are afraid to do it in the Oval Office because they can't live up to the watermark that he created. They just aren't communicators on that level. Oh gosh. Obama, the guy's oratory skills were just incredible. The only person who came in a close second to him was Clinton. I mean, Clinton was quite a speaker. Both of them could deliver really motivational speeches where you could sort of listen to them and get sort of, they were so hopeful for the future, really inspirational. George Bush, 43, the poor guy, he had 9/11 and he never could shake 9/11. Obama had the ACA, that the Obamacare. He got that through, and then catching bin Laden. After that, I have to tell you, by and large, no one covered him. I mean, with the whole second term, we were there, but we weren't putting anything on the air a lot of the time. Then, all right, here's the doozy. Trump got in there, and he was totally different. I mean, he used social media, and he just blew the regular news media right away. I mean, it was kind of interesting because they really didn't even have briefers in the briefing room most of the time, and they had some, but they almost never briefed. And he would quite often, when he'd do his helicopter departures, he'd be flying somewhere to give a speech or whatever. He'd come over and he'd talk to the media when they would be out there waiting to film the departure, and he would do like sort of an impromptu press conference. But the thing that was really interesting about it was, because if he had done them in the briefing room, there's a camera like behind the president, a cutaway camera, so you can get a picture of the reporter asking the question when he's asking it. And then there's two cameras. There's the one on the president and the one picking whoever is asking a question. Well, with the helicopter thing, since there's sort of a rope line and all the media is behind that, there's no second camera to get the picture of the reporters. So the reporters were completely out of it. It was like Trump all the time, 100% of the time. I got to believe that the reporters were furious about that. He completely aced them out of their role. He could just move on. If he didn't like a question, he would just sidestep and go to somebody else 8 feet away. And, it was just sort of like, oh, next, so, there were all kinds of different styles. The use of Twitter was like so disruptive to the news media. I mean, they would wake up in the morning, there'd be like, 5 or 6 tweets. People would be ready to like go to lunch, and all of a sudden there's the tweets are coming out, and it's like, I'm ready to go home. No, hey, we need you to do this because he just tweeted. I got this all the time. So it was crazy. It was insane. He stepped over the media, and I guess it's going to be that way from here on if somebody wants it that way. Oh gosh, there's almost too many things to remember here. Does that cover it?
Yeah, that covers it for sure. And I think that because you talked about the one-term president. If I saw your career correctly, I think you were maybe gone before Trump, was deemed a one-term president. So I just wonder what it was like, as in the first Bush White House, those last 3 months when you're kind of a lame duck. What's the mood in a White House that is just,
wow,
they've already lost?
It's really interesting. Well, the first thing you notice when you have an outgoing president is all day long, these White House or executive office building, which is right next door to it, employees are bringing friends through and giving them like VIP tours, like, hey, I'm only going to be working here another couple of months, so I want to bring my family in and show them, give them a personal tour through the parts of the White House that we're allowed to walk through, or that sort of things. You see all that stuff, but generally, like, the news dies down, like you just stop putting things on the air. I can tell you, Bush 43. When he was on his last few months, the banks were crashing. We had the 08 bank crisis, and banks were failing. And he really looked disparaged because what was happening for about 3 or 4 weeks there, these banks would be failing, and then they would cut the Treasury Department, and people on Wall Street would cut a deal for one bank to buy another bank to shore them up and that sort of thing. And then he'd have to come out with his Treasury Secretary on Monday mornings. And this happened 3 or 4 times, I know, because I had to film them. And they would have to say, well, we just engineered this deal to save such and such bank over the weekend. Another bank's buying them. And so you could tell he had Paulson, his Treasury Secretary, do all the speaking. Bush just sort of stood there like as if to look like, I don't want to be here for this. This wasn't supposed to happen, and he would just largely remain silent. So you'd see that sort of thing. I can tell you here's a funny one. When Obama, here's a real odd one. The last day of a presidency, when the new one is getting sworn in, if you happen to be at the White House, and I've been there several times for this, it's like slack tide when they're up at the Capitol doing the swearing in business. There's like no president. There's no one in the White House. There's no president there. They couldn't care less what you could walk across the front lawn and they wouldn't send the dogs after you or whatever. There's no president there. I know the Obama White House, they had there's a door from the briefing room that goes into what's called the lower press office, where that's where you can sort of go in and talk to some of the press handlers if there's a reason to go talk to them. And they had a wall in there that you could see through the doorway, and they had all these like front pages of newspapers on that wall, from all these great headlines that pertain to his presidency. And the funny thing was, in the morning, they were all there. And I took a picture of it with my phone, because I knew that those are coming down, man. Those are going to be gone, And then the cleaning staff at some point during the day is, they're told all that stuff out of there, get rid of it. I mean, yeah, people leave stuff behind. It's a joke or it's funny or whatever. Get it out of there. And sure enough, they were all gone by that afternoon when the Trumps were going to come into the house. All gone. It was quite funny. And then the funny thing was when they swear them in up at the Capitol, and they come down Pennsylvania Avenue in a parade. It takes quite a long time, even after the swearing in, for the president to actually get to the White House. They put a huge reviewing stand there at the White House for these things, for the inaugural days. And so the new president comes in, usually, like goes to the bathroom, changes clothes, whatever, has a sandwich or something like that, then goes out and sits in this reviewing stand for a couple of hours and watches the rest of the parade come by. It's really like an old Americana kind of thing. And when the Trumps got there, I could see when they pulled in the driveway and went in the White House, and all the rooms were lit up upstairs, and we were out on the front lawn waiting for them to come out to the reviewing stand. I was like a pool camera for that. And you could see when they got in there, all these sort of silhouettes against the curtains of people sort of running around like, hey, check this out, like here's this room or that room or whatever, so kind of funny to watch, because we would all know what the rooms were, because what the floor plan of the place is. And so not that you've been on the second floor, which is the residence part. And that's what I'm really talking about, the second floor at this point. But you're aware of what rooms are up there, and their general locations. So it's amusing to watch that sort of thing. Hey, you get in the White House, trust me, you're going to be running around going, man, look at this thing,
I'm sure. And what was it like for the press with all these new, presidents? You've covered, 6 different ones. Was it always kind of like, I wonder how this is going to be, what the relationship's going to be? Are they the ones that kind of set the rules for the road, or is the press the ones kind of more like this is the way that things are done, or how's that?
Oh, every new White House has its way of doing things, and it's just really what they want. In some cases, some of them want, like, it's the types of shots, the types of locations they might have had the president speaking in certain rooms. An incoming president will deliberately mix that up and make the shots look different. Like maybe instead of having the podium against this wall, they'll put it running the length of the room to make it look different, because they want it to visually, seem different.
I want to ask you now, this question I would have never made you answer, but it was on your list. And who was your favorite president?
Yeah, actually, that was a trick question, because I get asked that question. You meet somebody at a party or something, and they're like, hey, well, which one did you like the most? And like, I never was ranking anything in my mind that way ever. And my answer has always been, well, I'm not sure I liked any of them. I mean, like, I didn't, necessarily put them there or anything. In a lot of cases, they made my life miserable. Every time one of them would have a crisis, I'd be working 12 or more hours a day and expected to come in on the weekends too. So I was never liking somebody that much. I mean, do they chum around with people a little bit? Yeah, presidents will chum around with the camera people a little bit, because to have a little bit of rapport with people and make things a little bit of fun. But as far as liking them, like a president, it gets down to like, what are they really doing while they're in there? And I can tell you, I'm not sure a lot of people even know until the presidency is over with. What agenda did they go in with? I mean, who are they really representing? Again, I'm not sure people know, and I don't think you can tell by just standing there 12 feet away with a camera. It's just, that's why I can honestly say I'm not sure I liked any of them, because, well, they all did things that didn't work out. They all had ideas that probably weren't great ideas, and then they all had successful ideas as well. So that's my answer. I'm not sure I liked any of them.
Yeah, well,
it's trick questions.
I mean, the one obvious though you want to ask, but it's not on your list, is maybe one wasn't your favorite, but was there a least favorite?
Well, like I said a few minutes ago, when they have a crisis, it becomes your crisis too, because all of a sudden one day it turns on a dime and you're working way more hours, and it goes on for weeks or months. The Clintons definitely had more sort of crisis situations because they had more scandals. But all of them end up with scandals, every one of them. It's just a question of how much do the scandals get legs, and do they sort of go out of control? Some were harder than others. I mean, I'm glad I was only there for 2 years of Trump. I missed the 2 impeachments. I don't think I would have been up for 2 of those. It was the time I was in there with it, it was so radically different from the get-go. It wasn't like any of the other 5 in any way. That I was kind of at the end of my patience with a lot of where the business was and a lot of the work. So I was very happy to leave at the beginning of 2019.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that makes some sense for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think I understand that for sure, that it matters more about how often they made you, miss seeing your family rather than actually their personalities. I understand
and
that.
I didn't really feel that I was, like intellectually equipped to decide whether I liked what they were doing. A lot of it at the time when they make the case for something, there's a certain amount of logic to it. Look, all of them have some level of charisma. Otherwise, they never would have made it to the top national office. Okay. Even if you didn't vote for them, you discover there's actually components of their personality they're entertaining and fun. So once you keep seeing that over and over, that you can be, I don't want to say fooled by somebody's personality, but you can focus on things that aren't necessarily relevant. So what I'm trying to say is, I think you hear this line about history judges people, and I think in the end, you got to stand back a little bit, and that's kind of what happens.
I want to ask you one more question kind of about this area, and then I want to kind of get to your book and things like that. So obviously your life revolved around, the White House and these presidents for a long time, 6 different presidents for over 30 years. And you talked about them kind of, some of them being, more chummy or buddying up than others. Every one of them had you at least spoken to? Was there anyone you covered for 8 years that you never even exchanged a single word with?
No, I think I was able to have, some really, it's small talk is what I'm saying. Like maybe you film an interview with them and there's just a little bit of small talk around that. Again, George Bush 41 was more fun because, like, I remember one time he was like, we thought he was going to come out blue fishing, and we were out there and he wasn't really coming out. So the guys that we were chartered the boat from said, "Hey, let's get the rods out and start fishing." And we're like, "Okay, that's great." So we did that. And then the next day, and we caught fish. Okay. We caught fish right out by his house. And then the next day, I think it was a Sunday, and he was at church, and he came out of church, and our reporter, Ann Compton, talking to me, he was like, 5 or 6 feet away from me. And she says, "Hey, my cameraman, Chris Carlson, and his sound person, Melissa, over there, were catching fish yesterday. And all of a sudden he's asking us, where were you catching the fish? And we're telling him, so that, I mean, that was always fun. But, it's all on a level of small talk. And, generally speaking, you're like about 12 feet away from these people, and they sort of come and do their thing and they walk away, and that's it. I mean, again, you don't know them. I mean, like, I think a lot of people are mistaken to think like there's a like relationship. No, not really. Generally speaking, no. I mean, but there's a professionalism and a cordial relations. And I think that people mistake that for thinking there's like a relationship,
Right. I got you. Let's talk about your book. You wrote a book kind of detailing a little bit about your experience or one instance, but talk about that book.
All right. Well, when I realized I was going to be retiring, I started writing down a bunch of my stories because I wanted to do them before I was actually, had left, because I knew I'd probably want to get most of it in the rearview mirror, and I wouldn't want to sit down and write at that point. So I'd written a whole bunch, and I did have to write 9/11 because it was historic. I mean, it's something they're going to be talking about 100 years from now. And so, since I had been on the trip that week, he went to Florida to do a reading demonstration with some school children. He had this thing called No Child Left Behind. It was some legislation to change the way education was done, at least on the federal level, and funding and that sort of thing. And so he was trying to sell that, and he was working with people in Congress to try to get it done. Anyhow, so we went to Florida, and he was supposed to attend a reading demonstration at school. And literally while he was en route to the classroom in the motorcade, that's when the 9/11 events unfolded. So when they got there, they just knew a plane had hit one of the World Trade Centers. They had no idea it was a passenger liner. They thought it was like a Cessna or something, And I think that's what most of us thought as well, until we saw it on the TV screen. And then he was in the classroom during the reading demonstration when the second plane hit. And then his chief of staff came over and whispered in his ear that the second tower had been hit, and they were both large planes, and that we were under attack. And that's where he was, sort of had this moment of, whoa, what's going on here? He was a very polite man. So he let the kids go on. It took about 5 or 6 minutes when he was able to exit the demonstration. He did, and he went on, got briefed on the thing, and then did a statement at the school before he had left. We were pretty convinced, maybe he was under attack too. He got in Air Force One, and they took off, and they went to 2 different Air Force bases, Barksdale in Louisiana, and then Offutt up in I think that's Nebraska. And because I guess they thought it was safe refuge there. And they weren't even sure. They didn't even know if they're going back to Washington, D.C. that day. He ended up going back, and he did an Oval Office address that evening. So I detail that whole story, the parts of it I was involved in it with directly, and the parts that I wasn't, because as a pool member, you rotate in and out of the pools each day. So I knew all the players who had the front row seat on all the different parts of it. So I had my stories and I had their stories mixed in. And then I follow it through till that Saturday, where on Friday he had gone to Ground Zero, and then on Saturday he's briefing his cabinet on what happened at Ground Zero, or what he saw at Ground Zero. And they're at Camp David in this. There's a little sort of enclave up there of nice little houses in the woods, and we did a photo op in there with him, and he's explaining. And I was the pool camera; I was the only video camera in there, and he's talking about what he'd seen, the destruction, and so forth. And then when he alluded to who may have done it, he said, we're going to smoke him out of his hole. And I hadn't even heard of the name Bin Laden yet. I think most people had. And I think that started picking up steam after this. They obviously knew it was him, and they knew he was hiding out in caves in Afghanistan, but we didn't know that. The public didn't know that. And so when he said, we're going to smoke him out of his hole, I literally got goosebumps. I never heard anything like that before. I'm thinking, like, who, what hole, where, what? And it was just bizarre. Of course, during the next month, he used that phrase about 3 or 4 more times, and it was equally as spooky, but we were learning more then about Bin Laden, and where he might be and that sort of thing. Whereas the first few days of the thing, it was literally just the hijackers' identities and the FBI sort of painting a picture of how these guys got into the country and commandeered these planes. So I wrote about the first 5 days of it, and I thought it was interesting and historic. And I put it out as an ebook just because, to me, it was that notable. And it's just as simple as that. There were other people on the trip, but I don't think anyone else put it into a little book.
Certainly historic, and the seat that you witnessed it from is one that most people by a large amount didn't experience it from. So I think that's definitely an interesting book to read, and I want to get to how people are going to find it. But before we get to kind of those closing questions, last question I kind of want to ask you, we've already kind of touched on it a little bit, but just being somebody who's helped kind of show us the news, obviously today the news is quite interesting, definitely when it comes to cable and sometimes even broadcast news, but it's an interesting world. So I want you to kind of just to tell us kind of your advice for people who consume news, what lens we should be looking at things at.
Well, I think that you need to immediately discern whether what you're consuming is actual news, where it's like a pen and pad reporter, or, boots on the ground, like, was the person there? Okay. Because if they weren't there, then it might be editorial, and so much stuff is editorial now. And, again, it's not like you can put the toothpaste back in the tube, but the internet lends itself to people just sitting at their desktops, cutting and pasting, and then putting in their own blurb in the middle of it. And they weren't there. They had no part of covering it, but they're now editorializing. So it's really easy to make a soapbox out of everything. What are you consuming? Stuff that was from the people who were there. So I would say, if the answer to that is yes, you're one step closer to having more of the authentic story. The other part of it is, well, are they, what type of media are they? Are they an internet media? Well, I'll tell you, very few of the internet medias are there. The things I was at, not many of them attend them. They just don't have the money. It'd be nice if Facebook hired 1,000 reporters, but that's not the case. So, what type of media was it? If it's broadcast, it's probably going to be straightforward. If it's cable, they can say anything they want. And the big news cycles and the big editorial wars really are coming out of cable. If it's print, I don't know. It could be. It's probably, if you're reading from the AP or Reuters, if it's from the wire service, if you're reading their copy that's in a paper, it's authentic. They're pretty much giving you what happened. So you sort of have to vet it on your own. I'm sorry, there's so many possible sources now. I try to remind myself when I read something on the internet to first look up at the top of the page and see, like, who wrote it and what organization. Have I even heard of this organization? And by the way, is there a date on it? Half the time there's no date on these articles. How often have you read something and you're like, wait a minute, and then you look and you find out, wait a minute, that was 2 years ago, or something crazy like that. So the internet is just not, you really have to sort of check what you're seeing, in my view. I slip up. Sometimes I read something like that can't have been yesterday, and then I find out it was or it wasn't. So you got to figure out, is it real news or is it editorial? And I would say the internet has caused so much editorial that it's even causing some of the real news guys to editorialize more. Like, the New York Times has 9 editorials in it every day. The Washington Post has 6 editorials in it every day. I don't think they need 6 or 9 editorials. I think they're confusing. And I actually try not to read them at all. Once in a while, one of them tricks me. I get in there and read it, but I wouldn't get my news off of Facebook or Instagram.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Just in kind of the funny thing you said, Facebook is famous for that whole date thing, where people, I have a whole group of friends that have posted something like, sad, some movie star died, and then I see, like, do you realize this is an article from like 5 years ago? This person's been dead for 5 years, and all of a sudden
Right.
now you've decided, rip whoever. So yeah, I think that's a big thing for sure. And I don't think, regardless of what side of the aisle you are, I feel like everyone can see that Facebook is an interesting place, and you really got to vet things if you really want to get good information for sure. So, I mean, the next question I want to ask you, and in wrapping things up, how can people get your book? And then just to kind of piggyback off of that, because that's something you did right at the end of your career. You've been retired for a few years. We talked about it in the very beginning, kind of what you've been up to, but I do want to know kind of what the future holds for you.
I don't really know. I mean, I wrote the book, and then I had read that, good way to, by the way, books, if no one knows it's there, they don't know it's there. So I read this thing that said, a good way to promote your book is to do, podcasting. And I thought, well, let me look into that. So I've been doing some of these, and it's really nice that somebody's, curious enough to ask you these questions. So I've been trying this. I don't know, I got to tell you, I'm just trying to get through and have fun with my kids and my grandkids. That's been a little more difficult the last couple of years because of the pandemic. I don't, once you retire, the nice thing is you kind of go like, well, I don't have to have any plans, So, I mean, you see that airplane back there. I got into like flying drones around. I'm not that good with that thing. That if you crash, the drone flies itself. That thing will crash. So I've had some fun doing that. I'm kind of, if I was 20 years old, I'd probably have better reaction times for, the video game style reaction times for that sort of stuff. Now, I don't have any huge plans. Just I'd like the country to open back up, and the whole virus thing I hope we're at the beginning of the end of that. I hope. I'm being optimistic. Just like to get back to hanging out with people and, having a beer somewhere or whatever, and having people over for dinner, that sort of thing. Yeah, I didn't plan on, hanging out in the house this long. And, I'm, in the DC area here, and it's crappy weather. It's wintertime. I would have liked to have spent, the entire winter somewhere else. And, we probably would have done that by now. But, then these waves when the wave of the virus thing clicks up, it's like, well, would you rather get sick here or get sick someplace where you don't even have a doctor, So, you got to think about some of these things. I wish I was a little more free spirited than I am.
Yeah. Well, tell us how we can find your book and whatever connection points you have.
All right. Well, the book is on all the ebook guys. It's on Amazon Kindle, Apple Books, Barnes and Noble, Kobo. There's a few others. I mean, it's on all of them. Okay. So you can find it there, and it's just an ebook. I don't have a print, to put out a printed copy, you actually have to submit a whole nother differently formatted manuscript. So that's a whole nother piece of work. So I haven't done that. I'm kind of hardly, I'm not like really immersed in social media. So, but I did open a Twitter account, and my handle is Top Photo 9, the number 9, Top Photo 9. At Top Photo 9. So if somebody wants to shout out to me, that they could do it on that.
Gotcha.
That's pretty much it,
Well, I'll tell you, it's for pretty much it. You've covered a lot. We packed a lot into this. 6 presidencies, a whirlwind around the world. It's been an interesting conversation. I really appreciate your time.
Hey, you're welcome. I have fun talking to people, and I don't mind telling my stories. So thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So that was Chris Carlson. What an amazing guy who's lived just an amazing life. He did have a few technical issues, some audio issues. Hopefully that didn't limit your ability to enjoy just a fascinating conversation. Not a lot of people who have been able to, live the life that he's lived and be able to cover so many different presidents, have the stories that he has to share. I really enjoyed speaking with him. I'm very honored to have been able to have him on the show. Please do go check out his book on Amazon. He just mentioned that covers, his firsthand experience with 9/11 and working, for the media during that time. Check that out for sure. I think it's just a really interesting book that not a lot of people have that perspective. I hope you got a lot from this. This podcast is never one that's going to be overtly political. I think that this conversation, was allowed us to talk about both sides of the aisle. Every president has had their issues, whether they're Democrat, Republican, and anything else. We've only had those two at the moment, but I think that you can gain something regardless of your political leanings here. But really enjoyed speaking with him. Really glad that you would decide to listen. If this is your first time listening, please do go, rate it. Give us the 5 stars. Leave a review. Always appreciate that. Spotify, Apple. Appreciate those for sure. If you've listened for a long time, still haven't done that, please go and do that. Definitely appreciate those. Go check us out on Instagram, Not Enough Podcasts. Follow there. Any interaction, I always really enjoy hearing from listeners. But thanks for being here. We'll see you next week. Take it away, Chris.
This has been Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff. Thank you for listening. Be sure to join us next time, where we will interview another amazing guest who is sure to make you laugh or make you think. Or, hey, maybe even both. But until then, keep being awesome.